but a third-party country has come in and shuffled the deck and put some jokers in and taken some aces out.
Well, what I mean is by poker, like
talking about US.
I am talking about the US interfering in the UK's decisions.
But what I mean by poker.
Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. I'm joined this week as ever by Jamie and by occasional super special guest Ray from Light Reading, because Ian, apparently the trains all went mad. So you're a super sub. Thanks for being around, and thanks for just being you, basically.
Overall.
What do you want?
For just generally stepping up to the plate on a daily basis. All right, Scott, calm down.
Thanks, Mum.
What are we going to talk about? Right, we are recording this podcast on January the 31st, which is Brexit Day. For me, I'm pleased about it a lot because I put my cards on the table a while ago. I'm a big fat leaver, but other people won't be so happy about it. But I'm not going to labour the political point. There is a telecoms angle which we'll speak about. And then we're going to talk about, inevitably, and perhaps this will be the last time we have to talk about them for a little while, Huawei. Because for a little while.
Until next week.
Until what time?
Yes, well, quite. Because the UK and Europe finally announced their sort of policy on what to do about Huawei in the 5G networks. So we're going to unpack that a little bit and look at the implications. And then I think we'll probably move on to some of the... not just the implications, but it sort of sets in motion a sort of domino effect of other things that come into play when you can't have Huawei. And one of the alternatives to Huawei might be ORAN. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. Okay, and just to remind you that if you're watching this on the site or on Facebook or on YouTube, you can also listen to it on iTunes, SoundCloud, and countless other podcasting platforms. Right, so Brexit. So I'm like, yay. Ian was wondering whether or not I was going to bring a little Union Jack to symbolise my yayness. But obviously, for a lot of people, especially a lot of the people who didn't want Brexit to happen, there's a lot of concern about the disruption that will happen with respect to our dealings with Europe. I'm personally of a belief that it's just an administrative block and all these things can be overcome. Other people think it'd be more catastrophic. Obviously, nobody knows. And regarding telecoms, a big consideration is roaming. So one of the things, credit where it's due, while I'm not an unconditional fan of the European Union, from a consumer point of view, their directive to get rid of roaming charges was great. I go off, as Jamie was kind enough to point out in the intro to the last podcast, I sometimes go to Spain. We all like to travel. Pierre has obviously got a lot of European in him. So we all like to be able to go abroad and not have to worry about bill shock and all that sort of thing. And it wasn't that long ago. It was like as little as 5 years ago where you go abroad and it'd be a serious concern. And now we can be completely laissez-faire.
Actually, I'm going home tomorrow. I wonder what's going to...
Yeah, well, suddenly.
You think you're going home tomorrow. Is this not your home? This is your home now.
No, you can go home, but there's no guarantee we'll let you back.
Tuesday.
So
here's an experiment. Pierre, you need to stream Netflix on your phone while you're at home in France. And then, because, obviously the tabloid newspapers in the UK have been missing those stories where, British man has mobile bill for $4,800 because he watched Only Fools and Horses on his phone while he was in Magaluf. I'm missing those stories, and I think
I've been roaming for.
Why is it always Only Fools and Horses?
That's what I was watching.
Right.
I've been roaming for free with Three for a long time now.
That's hard to say.
Yes.
Roaming for free with Three. Yeah.
Yeah, well, they were a bit ahead of the game, weren't they? On the roaming.
Yeah, like a few years before.
But anyway, it does raise the whole roaming question, doesn't it?
And I wrote a story because the government's just published this website saying what happens on 1st of January 2021. Because although we're officially leaving, all the politicians somberly sign their documents and all that sort of thing today, we've then got 11 months to work out a lot of the sort of trade agreements and the bureaucratic new bureaucratic agreements. And so that's when it will kick in hard rather than tomorrow or when you're listening to this already. And so one of the things they said, and I saw some reporting on it, it saddens me. They said they can't guarantee the free roaming thing. That was the government statement, which is exactly accurate. And of course, plenty of people reported it as free roaming will end, which isn't necessarily the case at all. It just means that the current bureaucratic imperative is taken away. And so then it comes down to, will the operators or will the respective authorities find a way of replicating this policy with the UK? Now, I think it'll be a real sort of barometer, a real test of whether or not we're able to sort of function and cherry pick the best bits that we were getting from the EU or not. So I guess I've been banging on for a while. I'll chuck it to you, Ray. Do you think that the industry, the broader industry, might get together to perpetuate this zero roaming thing in a year's time?
No.
Why is that?
So because I think that the initial starting point will be, so the UK has decided to leave the European Union. Mm-hmm. If the UK operators are then afforded special rights to be still included in the no roaming agreement, then what about all the other countries that aren't in the EU? Surely they're going to come forward and go, we want this as well, actually, thanks very much, especially for the countries where there's the greater outgoing, where the balance is not so straightforward. So I think there is going to be a lot of consideration about the fallout from any decision that allows the UK operators to still be in the non-roaming charges agreement.
Totally. And I think that probably is going to characterise a hell of a lot of stuff. It's just the precedent being set. In principle, the things are already in place. No one's going to lose out. You just keep doing it. But as you say, then setting a precedent for the whole rest of the world. You could argue, if you're being sensible, but we're a special case because we were part of it and all those agreements are already in place and it's actually easier just to keep them going. But I totally take your point. If I was someone, even a close neighbour in sort of North Africa or whatever, let alone the US, I'd be like, hello. Why did they get special treatment? And then there's the underlying point that's happened ever since even before we had the vote, which is that Europe, it's politically vital for Europe to not make it look like the UK is benefiting from leaving, because then that sets a very dangerous precedent for them and might give their members other funny ideas. Yeah,
there'll be a hard lobby by the companies that sell data SIM cards at airports for the UK operators to not be included, because that should boost their sales. That's a perfect follow the money. Where's the money? That's always the starting point. And also the political aggravation. So there's going to be some people who go that will take the viewpoint of, well, the UK doesn't want to be here anymore, part of the European Union, so they should get none of the benefits of being part of the European Union. I think that would be a retrograde starting point as well, but that doesn't mean it won't be on the table, because people are petty tossers in general, as we've seen in the last 3.5 years.
Well, indeed. Arguably on both sides, and I'm sure that's what you meant. Jamie, you were just chatting about roaming and stuff, and there were a couple of other things. Firstly, I think you brought it up before we started recording, that the ultimate decision-making power is completely outside of the UK. And then you were also chatting about the implications for MVNOs. Why don't you elaborate on that?
Yeah,
elaborate on that.
Go on.
Ultimately, it's a decision which is, it is in the operator's control, in the sense that they can decide how much of a loss leader a product they want to make.
That's true.
If there is this sort of situation becomes really, really horrible for them. But the termination charges of data in Europe is currently controlled at EU level, and I can't remember exactly how much it is, but European operators cannot charge more than X euros per gigabyte which is downloaded over the network.
Right.
The way in which it works nowadays is that there's a lot of reciprocal traffic going back and forth between the nations. So roaming isn't a factor on your bill nowadays because there is, they're absorbing as much as they're giving out to the telcos. So it's net gain, net loss, literally nothing. The issue becomes is when you start removing these EU regulations, and the European telcos can say, well, actually, we can charge you however much we want, and then all of a sudden you've got a lot of outgoing from the some UK operators in certain markets and less for the others. For instance, the biggest headache is probably going to be BTE. Because, I mean, ultimately, they have a single network. They might have partnerships in place, but they do not own physical assets in European countries.
Yeah. As opposed to Telefonica or Vodafone.
Telefonica has a network in Spain, which is the biggest, is where the vast majority of what is it? It's the most popular European destination for Brits in Europe.
Only fools and horses watchers.
Yeah. So if they're so that makes sense. Vodafone. You look at the other really, really popular destinations in Europe. You've got probably Italy, Germany. I mean, France is going to be up there, but it doesn't help my point really. Greece.
Portugal's really popular.
Yeah. That doesn't help my point
Greece,
either. But what I'm saying is those three, Vodafone. So Vodafone have networks in those countries. So all of a sudden, all the UK traffic can terminate on a Vodafone network. So it's, if for instance Bix decides, or Proximus or something like that goes, we're going to start charging 20 euros per gigabyte. For every UK traveller that comes into the country, then all of a sudden, none of the UK operators have a network in Belgium. They got to think to themselves, that's a lot of money that we're absorbing.
Well, they won't. I
to
think
maintain.
They'll pass it on.
Yeah. So that's the big.
They'll pass it on, wouldn't they? Typically.
Yeah.
20 quid a gigabyte.
I think they'll pass on anything. I think they'll pass on
anything
because from a customer relationship point of view, from a PR point of view, they can go, don't look at me. They're the ones who are charging you. I'd rather you didn't have to pay it, son. But they're the one who's charging you. I've got to pass it on. I'm not made of money, innit?
Yeah, but there's no loss for the other company there, though, is there? I mean, because like Orange might go, like BT can turn around and go, oh, don't worry, I can save my PR reputation by saying it's not us, it's Orange. But then Orange turn around and go, well, give a shit, don't have any customers in the UK. So we can take that PR damage.
I think there's probably going to be a lot of conversations. So Belgium is a really interesting example because while quite a lot of people might go to Belgium, I would imagine that quite a few of the British traffic to and from Belgium might be business related. It's not a heavy location, for example, for a summer holiday. Now I know Portugal, for example, and I'm using that example because I know in Portugal that as soon as the referendum result came out, pretty soon after, the Portuguese authorities basically said, whatever happens, British tourists will always be welcome here and will have easy access in and out the country, even if blah, blah, blah. So
they immediately themselves about losing all this tourism.
So they will not want any part of the experience of people going to Portugal to put off British people going there. So I think there's going to be some countries who literally won't give a damn, and some countries that will be doing everything to make sure that British people don't go, you know what, I won't go to that place I've been for the last 3 years. I'm going to go over there because
Spain,
I can just walk straight in. I won't have the roaming deals. They say they've got PG tips on tap. It's all fine.
Portugal, Spain, Italy, they're probably, they're big tourism economies, and the UK has a very, very large population for most European nations.
And we largely like to get out of town sometime in August. So it could become a sort of political economic sort of bidding war, where roaming becomes a key factor in whether or not in the tourism industry of that country, which would be interesting.
And if it goes all the way to Brussels and they make a centralised decision, like I say, I think there's going to be loads of other countries kicking off saying, well, we want the same thing now.
Yeah. It's a tricky. I mean, the other thing to think about, and this is, if they do, some of the telcos might be able to say, right, okay, because we've got a lot of people coming into London, as it's still one of the most popular tourist destinations in the world, to be frank. Because we got a lot of European tourists coming into London, and it's a business centre, we might be able to offset the cost of terminating on other people's networks. But then what you were saying about MVNOs earlier, this is where it becomes incredibly difficult for MVNOs, because obviously they'll have to pay a termination cost unless that's factored into some sort of MVNO agreement at the top level,
right. Which would then cost them more anyway.
Which would cost them a load more to be given to the host operator.
Yeah.
But they won't be taking any money in from terminating traffic because they don't own a network. So they'll be paying out the nose, potentially paying out the nose in European cities, but then not getting anything back to offset the cost in Europe, in UK.
So it's a lose-lose for them.
It's a lose-lose for them. So
something's got to get sorted. Well, I mean, ultimately what will happen is, if European operators start charging a premium for roaming from the UK, that will just get passed on, and that could lead to some interesting changes. Depending on how good a job they do of absorbing it or what.
Spot the Brits abroad.
Yeah.
It'll be all the people huddling around the Wi-Fi points.
I know. Back to those dark days of having to jump on some crappy public Wi-Fi and be spammed with ads for custard tarts for the rest of your life.
Yeah,
I knew that would get me. Raise Achilles' heel. Don't you dare diss custard tarts.
It is an interesting bit, because I sent a few emails out before we came in here, and I've only had one back, literally about 25 minutes ago or something like that. I've only had one back, and they have turned around and said, we will guarantee no roaming charges, but realistically, like you
Someone said that.
Three have guaranteed no roaming charges post-Brexit, but it might be taken out of their hands because, Mr. I can't remember what his name is, sitting in Hong Kong, who owns Hutchison, the Hutchison Industry Group.
Sounds good to me. I'll go with that.
He's not going to be very happy if Dave Dyson is going, well, actually, we've lost 70% of profit last year, but we've got loads of customers because we're doing roaming. And he's probably...
Well, he might not be very happy with Three UK at the moment anyway.
Well, yeah.
But remind me why?
Because they've got... they committed to a 100%. This is a segue into the whole Huawei discussion.
But they're persistent. They're persistent with
that.
They've said, we're going to carry... It's not going to be an immediate challenge. We're just going to carry on doing what we're doing and sort out the problem afterwards.
After
they get it. Theoretically, they can still carry on with their current deployment plan. But they just got to fix.
Hold the thought, because I'll introduce it properly, and then we can go back to that. Seeing as this segue has imposed itself on us. Look, Ray, this is my podcast.
Oh, yeah, I know. I was pointing out.
I know, I'm only joking. So, yes, big announcement. We've been putting it off for ages, the UK government, that is, making our call on Huawei. And then they finally came out and went, right, we're going to allow Huawei in the 5G network, but not anywhere in the core, and only 35% of the kit and the traffic. Is that about right?
35% of
the kit and the traffic in the
locations and of traffic volume.
The physical radio inventory in the network and the annual percentage of traffic which runs through the network.
So there's that cap, which you thought, okay, given that there's at least 3 viable operators, that's a third. That seemed quite reasonable, but in the case of some operators, and we can get back to 3, but there's also BT, which Jamie wrote about, that is going to cause problems. So go back to where you were before I interrupted you, talking about 3 if you want.
Well, you say there's 3 viable
vendors. You mean
vendors? Yeah. The really interesting thing is that they are gutting their network with a vendor radios that isn't even part of the 3 that you've got in mind,
right? Because
their Samsung was their previous vendor.
Right. So this is 3 UK, yes. But a lot of Samsung in their radio access network, yeah.
So they're getting out a lot of it now to ensure backwards compatibility with 4G radios because of non-standalone for the radios in 5G. But yeah, so obviously they've said our main supplier is Huawei. They're going to carry on going, as far as I've read to date, purely because they don't have to actually do anything in the immediate future. They can carry on with this plan and then just say, okay, from 7 months onwards, we start introducing new radios because, let's say they get 2,000 radios out into the field over the next 6 months. That'll probably be still below the 35% cap. And they're hitting the most hardcore areas, the most important areas at the moment. Right. And they obviously selected Huawei for a reason, because they thought it was the best. So
yeah, but hang on a minute. The evaluation of alternative suppliers, you can't just go, let's call some people in and get their kit. It takes fucking ages. The big problem with all this is not in sticking an antenna up or anything like that. It's in the OSS. It's in the management software. That's where the problem is.
But the thing that the only saving grace that they have is that, number one, they haven't gutted their network completely from Samsung kits. So if they wanted to go to Samsung, that's an easy fix, because they've got backwards compatibility there. And number two, it's not been that long since they've been doing their testing and their trialing with all the other vendors. So they have actually gone through that process very recently. So it's not like they're going to start right at the beginning. Right. They can sort of update and build on the work that they've done with previous vendors in the network. Because I'm assuming they had a chat with, that maybe they're completely gunslingers in 3, and they've just gone, no, Huawei, bugger the rest. We're not even going to talk to them or test out their radios.
They would have gone certain other way. But I think if there's any kind of coolness being put out there, I would say behind closed door there's probably a few haircuts are on fire at the moment, because if you look at BT, right, so they're nowhere near in as committed a position with Huawei as 3 is, and they've said that it's going to cost them an estimated £500 million to rejig their strategy. So, 3 is all very well saying it's like, we're not stopping what we're doing today, blah, blah, blah. But they're going to have to rejig their strategy at some kind of cost at some point. So, and then they're going to need to figure it out pretty damn quickly, because 3 years is not very long. Yeah. And that legislation is going to be in place pretty soon, I would have thought.
3, so, I didn't say at the start, 3 years is when they've been told to have hit this 35.
That 35% and that 3 years, as I understand it, are both deadlines that were much more aggressive than the industry was expecting.
Okay, I didn't know that. Was good.
So there was some eyebrows.
So they thought maybe they were thinking like maybe 50% 5 years or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, at the other
even longer, actually.
All right.
Oh, really? Longer than 5 years?
Although I got the impression that the 3-year thing had some soft qualification. It was like, we would like you to, sort of thing.
At the moment,
because it's proposal, isn't it?
So
isn't it regulator rather than legislative?
Oh yeah. Well, I don't know. At the moment, the only thing written down in black and white says that there's the sort of calculation is that the operator should be in a position to be able to hit that 35% mark within 3 years, but it's not an absolute set. So I'm sure, like, the legal teams now are queuing up to argue for a longer time period, and I wouldn't be surprised if they get it,
right?
Because really, at the moment, it's all been about getting a decision out there so everybody can huff and puff and whatever, and then move on. And down the line, if they stretch it out to 4 years, I would think, that would be a sensible thing to do, because you don't want to damage anyway the position of the operators. It's going to cost. And also, you don't want them to rush into something and start having network problems, or be seen to be not hitting some kind of target or whatever. it's all a bit.
Well, we were
nonsense.
arguing a toss about that on the phone yesterday.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
I thought it's quite possible that the operators could sort of fudge it a little bit, and that the enforcement might not be that huge. But Ray pushed back on that.
They were always gonna. I mean, this is it's like a game of it's just like a game of poker. This is ultimately, and this is the opening bet from the government. The operators were never going to be happy about the percentage. They were never going to be happy about the time frame, except O2. O2 are literally going, well, we don't have to do a bloody thing.
We're good.
Yeah, they got something like a dozen Huawei radios in their network, which is legacy. Legacy from trials.
It is a game of poker,
yeah.
But, a third-party country has come in and shuffled the deck and put some jokers in and taken some aces out.
Well, what I mean is by poker, like
you're talking about US.
I am talking about the US interfering in the UK's decisions.
But what I mean by poker is that this is the opening bet, and there was always going to be a counter from industry. So even if the UK government turned around and says we're going to give you 5 years, the operators would have been up in arms and said, actually, we want 7. Irrelevant of the time frame.
I agree. It's the start of a negotiation.
Push it,
well, especially when they've left it a little bit open-ended.
Yeah.
Well, actually, one thing I think would be interesting to do at this stage is just quickly ask both of you what you thought of the decision. Starting with you, Jamie. When you read it, you covered it first up for us. What was your gut feel? Was it a good decision, bad decision? What?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I don't think there was any. It was always going to be painful, and I don't think there was ever. The only bad decision was going to be no complete ban of Huawei.
You mean no ban whatsoever, no restriction?
So no Huawei.
Okay.
A complete ban.
A complete ban would have been the worst decision.
Yeah. Okay, would have been the worst decision. Everything else is just negotiable, and it's the one thing that has been killing the UK the UK operators in particular over the last 6 to 12 months has been this position of uncertainty.
Yes.
You cannot
That's
do
kind of Brexit
anything
broadly in a nutshell as well.
Yeah. But you can't do anything unless you have a concrete answer. Now, even if they put down the restriction at 10%, I know that's a ridiculous number, but that's a concrete answer that you can develop a strategy for.
Yeah.
Even with all this negotiation over the last 6 months, because the supply chain review is been going on for actually only 6 months. It's been a lot of up in the air, arguing for 12 to 18 months, but it's only been going on for 6 months.
And changes of people responsible for it and everything. So a lot of upheaval,
I was looking
at
the
general election as well.
Yeah, I was having a look at it the other day, and the number of people over the last 3 years. So in charge of what is now DCMS, so the department that oversees digital
and culture and sport. Yeah, it's a bit of a sprawling department, isn't it?
So prior to that,
back of the net, son.
So you had Ed Vasey in charge of this department. He was
his character,
yeah. He was the longest serving Secretary of State in a single department in sort of like Tory history or something like that. It was something like 2,200 days he was in charge of that department.
Okay.
When he started there, digital wasn't even in there because it wasn't even that important at the time. It was like 2010, so this is like prior.
That's right. Digital wasn't important.
Well,
right, yeah.
But since he left,
smoke signals and carrier pigeons.
There's been something like you've had Hancock. But he took over from someone, I can't remember exactly who he took over. Then you had Jeremy Wright. Then you had Nicky Morgan. Then Nicky Morgan stepped down because she wasn't standing as a constituent. Then she got put back in the position because she was given a baronessship.
Yeah. There we go.
And then underneath that, you've had about 5 different digital ministers, including one that just got appointed a couple of months ago, who's an ex-Telegraph journalist.
That's it.
Who's Warman, Matt Warman, who's in charge of the digital.
They've got a hack. They've got a good old tech hack in there.
So,
go team tech hack.
So the actual getting any decisions, like I said, it's been all over the place. I mean, there's about 7. They've gone from one decision maker for 2,200 days through to like 8 different policy makers in 4 years.
But I tell you what hasn't changed in.
Yeah, that's why we should get rid of the civil service, not have any of this longevity and people who actually know how stuff works. Absolutely.
What was that? Was that a little Cummings? Was that a Cummings dig? one thing that hasn't changed much over that time is the advice they're getting from the spooks and the techies and all that, which has consistently been, for as long as I'm aware, that yes, there's a risk and we can manage it. And basically what they ended up concluding, let's just keep them at the core to be safe, and we can manage any risk that there is of them involved in Iran.
Huawei has always been deemed high risk for lots of different reasons, and that's why there's an entire testing centre devoted to checking Huawei's gear, which, by the way, no other vendor has. Yeah. So I think you could, and I'm sure Huawei does argue. I kind of stopped listening to their arguments a while ago. All right. Yeah. But you could argue actually that with that level of testing going on, that the least amount of surprises and the most knowledge about the issues you might have with any equipment is with Huawei.
Yeah. No, fair enough.
Which actually makes it the most suitable to deploy.
Yeah, and that's why they said in the review, we're always having to dance around the nationality of and just refer to high risk vendors, but they basically mean Chinese vendors, and that's
currently.
Yeah. Well, that's a good point. Yeah. And that's why.
Once you get that Open RAN vendor from Moscow, stick it in there.
Oh, don't start forcing the agenda again, Ray. I'm gonna have to pull rank on you, even though I'm your underling. That's why ZTE doesn't get anything, because they haven't got that transparent, come and check our stuff out facility that Huawei's got.
I think they. I know they're not under the microscope and probably not as trusted as much, but they do. They are free to practice business in the UK.
I think within the 5G. I mean, you remember I shared you when we were chatting about it. There was just one tiny little segment of the whole report that referred to ZTE, and it just said because they haven't got any facility like that, there's no way to mitigate their risk. And I interpreted that as them saying, if you can't mitigate their risk, then they're not allowed.
But that's not saying that they're not allowed to practice. That's saying that if they can meet the standards, I think they're just setting protocol.
They're not an option.
I don't think.
Well, I don't think their kit is deemed as good as the tier ones. And you look at where they get the most success, it's China, some Asian countries and Africa, because they are cheaper. Yeah, Austria.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Absolutely.
And Windtray in Italy.
Yeah.
So they've got a bit.
In Austria, they basically gave an entire network's worth of gear away for nothing, and magically got the deal.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's one way to do business, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Ray, what did you think of the decision, the UK decision?
I think, that it was probably, weighing up all of the things, it was probably the least worst decision.
That's almost exactly what I said in my analysis.
Oh, really? Oh, okay.
Great minds and all that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, so I completely agree, and my reasons for agreeing were, I agree with Jamie that totally banning them would have been bad. A lot of people don't see that. I was telling you earlier, I've been reading a lot of mainstream commentary on this, and it's quite interesting when what we do as our day job becomes a mainstream issue.
There's a huge amount of problem with the way that they did that, though. I mean, because they gave it to political journalists to write about, as opposed to letting the technology journalists write about the topics.
What are you talking about specifically? You mean breaking the news of the decision?
Yeah. So the FT had Nick Files, however you pronounce it, doing it. Yeah, but the majority of the other ones were actually political journalists writing about technology, as opposed to
like people like Nick Timothy, who used to work for Theresa May. I mean, I'm sure he's a smart enough, educated bloke, but it doesn't mean he knows about telecoms.
Yeah.
Anyway, and I just found it interesting, just to see some of the. It's because we think about it every day and we bang on about it every Friday, invariably. We know a fair bit, and then you see people who don't, just taking a punt. There's some people going, well, if there's any security risk at all, why take that risk? But that's incredibly binary, simplistic, because there's security risks everywhere, all over the place, not just from Chinese companies. You can't just go around banning everything that presents any risk whatsoever. So I think being able to claim that you can mitigate the risk is perfectly grown up.
I saw an absolute. I mean, it actually made me laugh out loud, which happens all the time, which is why I work from home, so as not to interrupt people.
And then your family's just going,
But,
Dad's gone mad.
But it was like this long diatribe about this, that, and so. And the only other option is to either have Nokia or Sony Ericsson.
Oh, my God.
This simply is not. It's like, oh, yeah, you really know what you're talking about, don't you?
Well, there was a little thing that I noticed. Our contemporary Keith from the Mobile Network flagged up a Nick Timothy thing because he'd gone, well, don't forget Huawei was blocked from doing the Wi-Fi in the London Underground, and that was 3G. And Keith just sort of gently went, well, 3G and Wi-Fi are obviously completely different things. And then Nick Timothy sort of climbed down a bit. And, maybe it was a deliberate error.
Yeah.
But
this is
it's just typical of a lot of people just banging on when they don't know that much about it.
And everything gets thrown in together, There is absolutely, the security threat posed by Huawei, or the security issues with Huawei, where there is deemed to be a technology security threat is because it's basically badly engineered. And this is exactly, anybody can read this. It's in the National Cyber Security Centre
because
documents.
they flagged some stuff up not too long ago, didn't they?
It's,
dodgy software.
Software's not good. The engineering is not good. Huawei has not provided any updates within a year, which then all of these things are bad for security.
Yeah.
What I think would be really interesting is actually if you put everybody's gear through the same process, which was actually
Germany's idea.
Well, no, even back, just maybe it was about a year and a half ago, I think the GSMA sort of said, well, what if there was a centralized pan-European test center where everybody's gear would go through it, and then if it got through, then everybody would have access to the same results and then be able to decide on that, but you wouldn't have to have everybody testing different things at different times, yada, yada. You'd have a centralized, I think Huawei...
And we've got some of the best testing companies in the world in Europe as well.
Yeah. But Ericsson and Nokia were really, really against this because, when you have that, it slows down the time. I'm not saying that they were against it because they say, oh, my God, they'll find that back door. But it would have curtailed some kind of business advantage. But if you think about it, if it was a fair world, then everybody's stuff, and like you say, Company X from country Y, doesn't matter. Put it through the same process so that it's really transparent. It'll never happen.
So this is apparently what the Germans are. This one of the ideas that they have to mitigate risk.
Now that would be really interesting.
Well, yeah, because I think there's a few people that have kicked up a bit of a fuss that have turned around and said, as much as we do think that we need to sort of measure the threat of some other people, if we're going to be democratic, we have to put this through. We have to put everyone through the ringer.
Yeah,
and I think this is one of the ways that Germany are going to try and mitigate the risk.
Right.
Effectively doing the process.
And what would be most interesting, because a lot of the testing at the moment is around the radio access network gear. If you started putting some of the core network elements through some testing processes, I think there would be some very interesting results.
Right.
Based on some conversations I've had with people who had too much to drink.
That's good old school journalism, that. And one thing you just alluded to earlier, Ray, is the Americans pressuring us,
interfering,
to make a certain decision. And that was another reason why I was quite happy with the decision. Like in my analysis piece on it, I put a few tweets from American politicians, and they were all losing their shit, going, well, they've basically handed the keys to the country over to the Chinese. Ridiculous hyperbole and all this sort of thing.
Total ban would have handed over, basically would have been putting a collar around your neck and giving the lead to the US authorities. So. Or US administration.
Exactly. I think one of them even had the nerve to say, they freed themselves from Europe only to enslave themselves to Chinese. Well, what they're basically saying is you should have enslaved yourselves to us. Anyway, so I thought, good for us. We're making our call. It's going to be unpopular.
Political hyperbole.
Yeah. It's going to make Bojo have to have some awkward discussions with Donald Trump. But, I think already, Jamie, you wrote a piece. So one of the more material threats they were making, other than just having the hump with us making the decision, was this Five Eyes alliance stuff, and how could they possibly collaborate with us on intelligence when the Chinese might know everything we do. And then almost straight away, didn't they, Jamie? They've started going, nah, we're good.
Yeah, so basically Pompeo turned around and he's just gone, yeah, we will continue our relationship, our special relationship with the UK. But I mean, this is something something I brought up a couple of weeks ago, that, you know, if you start threatening people with sort of like embargoes on sensitive data, you got to do it to everyone. And you know, if you ban the UK from having intelligence data, you've also got to ban the Spanish, because even more of a perceived threat is that Orange Spain has Huawei in its core. So if you're going to ban the UK on that grounds, you're going to ban the Spanish. Now, ultimately, the US has some excellent intelligence, but these data sharing agreements go both directions, and it has to augment its data with intelligence from other nations.
Totally.
And if it's banning everyone with Huawei, it's going to find itself very isolated very, very quickly.
I think the bigger picture here basically is that I would imagine that the US administration was not really expecting the UK to put an outright ban on Huawei.
No.
But I think that if this political interference had not happened, then a 35% cap and a 3-year time period would not have been the metrics.
It would have been more generous.
It would have been less aggressive. So I think in many ways the US has kind of got its way. It's sowed a seed of perception everywhere globally that Chinese technology is not to be trusted. And, you know, the phrase says, you know, sticks, and it really does. And so now we've got a bunch of companies and countries around the world who go, even if I thought Chinese technology was absolutely safe, I'm not going to use it because it's too much hassle.
Exactly.
There's too many questions from potential customers going, oh, are you using Huawei gear? If you are, I'm not sure I want to do business with you. And it's just less hassle not to use it. So in a way, the Americans have had their influence.
I mean, I just can't see. I mean, this is something that was brought up on a call that Huawei ran a couple of days ago. Is about the 35% cap and whether they can maintain their market share. And they're talking about, and Huawei is the number one vendor for RAN in the UK at the moment, and I think it's got about 35% market share of the total aggregates across of the total nationally.
Is that not a coincidence then? Do you think they just say, let's keep it where it is?
No, because they couldn't. They couldn't.
Right.
So Jeremy Thompson is he's another former hack, and he's working for Huawei. He's one of their VPs. He turned around and he said, well, actually, if we can get a 35% market share in every country we're in, we're doing a really good job. But there's absolutely zero chance that they're going to get anywhere near 35%, because
they're not going to end up with 35% in the UK, are they?
No, because they've got to reduce their outgoing with certain partners.
Yeah,
like 3 is 100%. You can get rid of that straight away. You know, that's 35% maximum. They're not going to sell anywhere near as much to E and Vodafone. And O2 have turned around and said, our suppliers are Ericsson and Nokia, and we do not see that changing in the near future.
As has Orange France today.
Yeah. So they're going to have to go down. 35% is where they are now. They have to go south.
As Ray was saying in the phone call I alluded to earlier, who's going to get close to that margin? And people are going to aim for 25-30 just to be safe, because they don't want to risk some regulatory aggro. So
or the perception that they are insecure.
Right, there we are.
I mean, the other thing is, I mean, I know this is you want to lead on to ORAN.
Okay, well, we can go there now. I'll allow it.
Well, the other thing is, like, ORAN, it is a big opportunity for ORAN, but I think this is also equally a big opportunity for Samsung. You know, Samsung has been deemed as second tier, and, you know, I know it's been gutted out of the 3 network at the moment, but it has been successful around the world for 5G. You know, at the moment,
in Korea, for example.
Verizon,
US, right.
It's one of the main suppliers to Verizon and AT&T, I think.
Yep.
And
they've just made an acquisition in North America of a systems integrator, so they clearly think there's more business to be done in North America. I think they're actually going for it this time.
They could. I mean, they could well win, and especially if the US
Samsung's
is
like.
Yeah. If the US is putting pressure on Canada, for instance, you got to think to yourself, Samsung have got a good opportunity there. Samsung do have an opportunity not to replace everything that Huawei is going to lose, because I imagine this is going to be big wins for Ericsson and Nokia, and probably ORAN, to be honest, over the next 3 to 4 years, maybe.
Down the line, more opportunity as part of the mix.
It's not a robust solution at the moment. It's not real. It's not a realistic. It's still embryonic. It's still looking for market validation. Realistically, you look at the massive ORAN projects at the moment. There's the Vodafone one, but that was only announced 3 to 4 months ago. So they've not really got that much kit in the network, if any. So they've not validated it yet.
And it's in a wholesale market in Latin America.
Yeah.
And you've got some other deployments going on in some markets in Africa.
Yeah. And
with MTN. Where the pressures.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all this is. I think that the whole thing about Open RAN is that it's not deemed. It's not yet carrier grade, if you like. If you couldn't put it in a city centre in a large economy and expect it to perform anywhere near the same as you would get from Huawei, Nokia, or Ericsson.
Well, it depends the situation, because Rakuten are driving forward, but that's a greenfield deployment, so they don't have to worry about the tie-in with legacy technologies. But there are a few telcos which are emerging, which should be realistically massive targets for the ORAN, like what's it called? 1&1 Drilsch in Germany that's a greenfield project as well.
Yep.
So they should be targeting massive. That should be a significant opportunity for them.
Yeah, and other opportunities in North America with new entrants like
Dish. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Dish has put out an RFP that is kind of Rakuten-like.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean, I think that'll slowly creep in, and this is why I think Open RAN was always going to be a pretty big topic at Mobile World Congress.
You think it's going to be one of the biggies this year?
Oh yeah, definitely, because it's much more. It's now being brought into the conversations even more than it would have been otherwise, because of the these various rulings limiting Huawei's involvement, and nobody wants to have a duopoly situation. At the moment, Huawei, Nokia and Ericsson command 80% of the radio access network market globally. Huawei's is going to be reduced. Samsung has some work to do, I think, to be a viable alternative in every market.
Could be an alternative,
but I think, if it really invests heavily, and that's basically what is needed, is money. You have to put the money in to get the money out. If they invest heavily, they could become a much greater alternative. ORAN will take a lot longer, but I think Open RAN will be a big topic of discussion, because there's still a lot to learn about it. The operators have a lot to learn about it, even those who are starting to use it, and that's what makes it naturally a very hot topic. Is that people are going to want to know more, and they're going to want to know, is it an alternative? And I've already spoken. I spoke to somebody at Ericsson just before Christmas on this, and of course they will take every opportunity to say absolutely no way is this a carrier grade alternative. And it currently, I think it's fair to say it currently isn't, but you can bet your bottom dollar they'll be pretty worried about it in medium term.
Yeah, and who's to say that operators can't, in their planning, sort of war game, having it in 5 or 10 years?
And the kind of argument thrown is, x86 servers are not going to cut it in a carrier grade mobile network, but that's not what this is going to be. This is not going down to the tech shop buying some servers off the shelf
and the graphics card.
That's right. Yeah. There's a lot of development going on in the components world, where you're going to have a lot of dedicated silicon in more off the shelf and more readily available IT infrastructure that is going to be an alternative to what you get from Nokia, Ericsson, Huawei. That's where it starts to get really interesting. So I think the companies to really watch out for MWC are the companies that are developing the specific hardware components and the software components that could go into a disaggregated network. So those are the ones that could turn the turn the market a little bit.
So just to build on that, I think one, and this is proper crystal ball gazing into the future now.
That's why we're
as
here.
Well, is the implications this has to shared networks and the trend we're seeing where infrastructure companies are buying towers. So they're buying, companies like Cellnex. Cellnex has been hoovering up assets across Europe, just so it's got the dumb passive infrastructure. You can sell space for for three to put their radio on.
And there's a lot of private equity going into all that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brookfield over in North America, Goldman Sachs, all these guys. But if Open RAN and sort of like these, the disaggregation becomes a lot easier, there's absolutely no reason why these infrastructure companies don't start buying active infrastructure, putting it on their on the sort of the towers, and then you can run services over the top of it. And especially with network slicing, if that becomes a real thing in release 16, if you can start slicing your network, Cellnex can buy an active radio, they can put it on a tower, and then they can sell a slice to any mobile service operator. So all of a sudden, the telcos don't have to buy radios anymore. I mean, obviously that's
but it
long
makes sense.
way in the future.
My interpretation of what you're describing is that they're basically raising the bar of how much stuff is sort of passive and commoditized. And
I mean, that
is
is
not proprietary.
That is the objective of disaggregating hardware and software, isn't it? Though, so you can buy factory plans.
What you just make a smart tower that's got all the processing stuff in there, and then you stick your software on top of it.
What gets really interesting, of course, is that all of the operators want this disaggregated technology so they can break away from the vendor lock-in that has peeved them for so many decades. But of course, it's not as simple as that. If you move towards a disaggregated model, there's a very good chance that you might end up being locked in to the systems integrators that make it all work. So it's flip side of every coin. And then who actually owns the technology? Who's responsible for it? What are the IPR implications? How do you test it? Who's managing the software? About all these kind of things.
I mean, the other
at the end of the day, remember, I think it was either last year or the year before, a lot of the large vendors were going, oh, absolutely. The future of networking is, disaggregation. We're fully on board with that. But, if you want something cheaper, all from one company that works together from day one, you can get it all from us.
Well, I mean, for me, it's...
and that's a great proposition.
The telcos are sort of like losing control of the industry, I think. And, from they're wrestling control back from the vendors.
They're trying to,
Yeah. But then the more you spread the wealth, the less influence you have, and the bigger you create the ecosystem, and the more layers you add into it, and the more service, like you said, the SIs that you bring in, you're reducing your influence and diluting your control. Then all of a sudden, if you start selling physical assets and dumb assets to guys like Brookfield or Cellnex, you don't have control over the physical assets of your network anymore. So you don't have as much influence on where they go. Obviously, as a customer, you can influence it. But then at the same time, this is the baffling thing. It's so short-termist, them selling all these assets, because they might get a couple of billion quid up front, but they're going to be a tenant for the rest of their lives.
The reason they do it is because they don't feel they've got the capital to invest in the network.
No, but if they,
they could borrow.
It's an interesting proposition, but let's face it,
they need the cash up front. But it's the idea of being a homeowner or a renter. Would you rather a rental agreement or a mortgage on your property? I know it's a very dumb down
it's a constant business consideration. How many hard assets to own rather than lease? What were you just about to say, Rhys?
I'd just say that the spectrum license and the regulatory aspect of all that actually might play a large part in just how far down the road that passive model could go.
Yeah. I see. I mean, to be perfectly honest, if you believe the argument of we can completely disaggregate software and hardware. And I know I'm sounding like really facetious there, but it's not intentional. But if you believe the extremities that the ORAN community are selling to you, and you've got this wonderful pot of gold, and leprechauns bouncing around all over around the corner,
like that little Mavenir filing that you just wrote about.
Yeah. Then then why shouldn't you be able to go to this completely disaggregated and disassociated business model where telcos are just a virtual company? They don't own any physical assets. You can just get rid of it.
They're basically all MVNOs to a certain degree.
And you could have telecommunications, CSPs, DSPs, whatever you want to call them, and just infrastructure companies like
Netco, Servco.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
The big debate of 1999. Not kidding.
Well, I believe
it could re-emerge.
And we're getting into the whole discussion about, does the global communications sector become one big platform that is just the physical IT and communications platform between suppliers of goods and services and the consumers, which currently the Amazon model pushed out into the whole community. And that's exactly what the many analysts sitting just outside this room are looking at, whether that model is viable.
Cool, okay. I think we've done about an hour, so that seems like a good enough point to wrap it up. So thanks a lot.
For Pierre, I think that felt like 4 hours.
Yeah, there was no fun talk about iPhones and stuff.
Nobody mentioned Apple. We didn't even talk about wearables at Mobile World Congress.
Oh, yeah, so we made a point. We were anticipating... Well, actually, we might as well finish off. So we're anticipating that this Mobile World Congress might be a little bit weird. Not like, before we were thinking it might be a bit weird because we had all these Catalan separatists smashing the place up. But now we've got this...
We'll still be here this year.
Who'll still be there. Yeah. But they'll be competing for headlines with this coronavirus thing. And you're going to get a hell of a lot of people flying over from China to Barcelona. You can get a lot of people walking around in those surgical masks, which would freak me out a little bit, if I'm honest, when I see that. It looks like something from a zombie film. And so this year's Mobile World Congress, which is a matter of weeks away, could have a slightly apocalyptic feel about it. And anyway, our little pun is that maybe one of the key themes of Mobile World Congress...
Pierre's little pun.
This is Pierre's. That's fair,
right.
Credit where it's due.
That's
credit
right.
where it's due.
Yeah.
Is that maybe wearables in the form of the masks. Yeah. Maybe we'll have smart masks.
Smart masks.
Smart masks suddenly go, run away.
They'll go purple if it detects.
Bluetooth masks. Yeah.
Again, stop. Have you written your will? Or something like that. Reminder. So there we are. On that very tasteless joke, I will wrap it up. So thanks a lot for bearing with us. Thanks a lot, guys, and make sure you join us for the next one.